Hey everyone, Rizzo here, and welcome to the second episode of my Cold War Zombies you guys are right. A bit premature to refer to this as a retrospective, so let's just go with Cold War Zombies review series. Not as catchy, but whatever. Later in today's episode, we'll be covering the first real installment in the new Dark Aether story. But first, let's talk gameplay, shall we? Before discussing the map itself, I'd like to talk about all the changes made to the core gameplay of Zombies this year because it doesn't matter how good the maps are if the core gameplay is fundamentally flawed. Oh shit, what's up Black Ops 4? Prior to release, Craig Houston stated that the team's goal was to fully embrace what has made zombies so fun over the last decade. With this philosophy came many changes that end up giving the player a newfound feeling of control and power. For starters, you can now choose to spawn in with any weapon you want, be it a light machine gun, grenade launcher, or just the classic 1911. I originally thought this was going to be a very problematic addition that eviscerated early game progression, but there's one very important balancing factor set in place, and that's the addition of a unique weapon rarity that I'll just refer to as loadout from now on. Speaking of which, weapon rarities are a new addition to Zombies and normally come in 4 different rarities: uncommon, rare, epic, and legendary tiers. But the loadout tier is unique in that it is far weaker than even a common tier weapon. Basically, this makes it so that you can bring whatever you want into the fight, but it's not going to take you far unless you save up the points or salvage to upgrade it. It purely exists for you to help make the match your own and shake up the early game. Diving more into the weapon tiers, there's, as previously mentioned, 5 separate rarities for all standard weapons. The higher the tier, the more powerful the weapon is. Like many changes Cold War proposes, this could easily go awry, but the way these tiers are integrated into the game's progression is, frankly, kinda genius. The wall weapon tiers remain stagnant throughout a match, but the mystery boxes don't. Instead, its contents would tier up throughout a game. At the start of every game, the mystery box will usually spit out common to uncommon weapons, but as the rounds go on and the zombies get stronger, so do the box weapons, eventually getting to the point where almost every pull is a legendary tier weapon or even a support kill streak. This simple addition makes it so that even if you get a weapon you like, there's still a reason to hit the box in the late rounds. Maybe it'll spit out a better version of the weapon you already have, or maybe it'll even give you a chopper gunner. Who knows? Chopper gunner, by the way, every bit as fun and fulfilling to use in Zombies as I thought it was gonna be.
God, I live for this!
But let's say you're like me. You don't like relying on the RNG of the box and have really grown attached to your starting weapon. What do you do then? Well, worry not. Weapon tiering isn't exclusive to the box and walls. If you go up to this funny little character in the particle accelerator room, you can manually upgrade the tier of your weapon through the 2 new currency systems that exist independently from points: salvage and high-grade salvage. Salvage is dropped randomly by killed enemies and can be used to purchase lethal and tactical equipment, support kill streaks, armor, and weapon tiers. These side currencies, and the way that all of it is balanced, bring something very important back to Zombies that Black Ops 4 desperately needed: a sense of constant loadout progression. I know I sound like a broken record constantly picking on Black Ops 4, but that game is the very antithesis of what made Zombies so addictive in my eyes, even if it is admittedly kinda fun at times. The most fun part of Zombies, for me at least, is starting off weak and constantly getting stronger as the match progresses. In Black Ops 4, you were given 200 health, which could not be increased, and an absurdly overpowered special weapon right from the start. So aside from activating my modifier slot, I never felt like I was progressing all that much as a player, which made the game a bit less engaging. Cold War, on the other hand, feels like a direct response to this exact critique. Like classic Zombies, you start out pretty weak, but as the match goes on, through gathering valuable resources, you're able to upgrade every aspect of your kit: weapon damage tiers, pack-a-punch levels, and of course, body armor, which acts like the armor vest from Extinction and replaces the zombie shield utility. Can I just say, thank Christ, I was really getting sick of the zombie shield and just how iffy its hit detection was. But as you progress, so do your enemies. In past games, zombies would constantly get tougher to kill until there became a point where you couldn't really do anything but one-shot them with infinite damage weapons. This was an incredibly hollow way of making the game, quote-unquote, harder, and is something I've always hated about Zombies from day one. Like I mentioned in my Onslaught review, I hated this part even of the zombie modes that I loved. Funnily enough, the game I constantly shit on, Black Ops 4, actually addressed this issue by capping zombie health at round 38, I think it was, and increasing their movement speed at round 55. These changes were a huge step in the right direction, but it still felt like there needed to be something more. Cold War found that something more by taking the positive additions made by Black Ops 4 and refining them. At round 51, I believe it is, you'll notice a couple zombies per horde are a bit faster than usual, which gives you more than enough time to get used to the speed by round 55, where every single zombie sprinted an unusually high speed, even faster than the Varrock sprinters from War at War.
This is Zach hunting for Gash.
This is me getting fucking pussy. Where is it? I need it.
Here comes the bitch.
I need it.
This makes it so that the high rounds, as long as you don't camp, are so fun to play. Constantly running around the map hearing zombies just on my tail, that is so much fun. Aside from merely refining existing mechanics, Cold War introduces two new aspects to standard zombies. The first is their damage output. I'll put the exact numbers on screen, but in this game, zombies start out fairly weak, only managing 30 damage per swipe until round 11, but can hit for a massive 90 at round 46. Second, to help deal with them pesky god mode spots, if a zombie cannot path correctly to the player because they're out of bounds, they'll rip into their torso, pull out a piece of themselves, and chuck it at the player, dealing the same damage as a melee attack. Discussing movement changes, in one of the most surprising changes I've ever seen in zombies, players can now vault over things. In prior games, if there was a waist-high railing in your way, you go around it, but in Cold War, you and the zombies can hop right over it to keep the action flowing. This may seem like a small change at first, but it opens up so many more strategies, adds a new feeling of freedom to player movement, and can end up creating some really intense gameplay moments. Like right here. I was doing the boss fight with my friends, and everyone was down but me. Now, in normal zombies, you would just walk around the room and revive the person. That still works in Cold War, and definitely would have been the smarter play here, but knowing that I can vault, I instead made the risky decision to jump over the railing next to a pack of megatons. It was risky as shit, but it paid off, and that is the kind of stuff I love in zombies. That little adrenaline rush you get from making a super risky play and having it pay off. And the final addition of the gameplay I'd like to discuss is the field upgrades, known in-universe as the Wand. What that stands for? I couldn't tell you. They function similarly to Black Ops 3 and 4 special weapons and the Electro-Schnells of World War II. After getting a certain amount of kills, you'll be able to activate a special ability. These abilities include the Frost Blast, the Energy Mine, the Healing Aura, the Aether Shroud, and of course, the Ring of Fire. These are wonderful additions to zombies that all accentuate a certain style of play. Are you one that likes to look out for your team? Consider taking Healing Aura into your match. Are you a hyper-aggressive high-round player? Ring of Fire is your new best friend. The way these field upgrades help complement different playstyles honestly reminds me of the class specials from Extinction. In that mode, each main class had a special ability you could purchase with the in-game currency known as Teeth, which function almost identically to the Ethereum crystals of Cold War. I really love the class system of Extinction and the Electro-Schnell specials from World War II, but I'd argue that the wands in Cold War are even better. So, there's a ton that I love about this iteration's core gameplay. I've made no secret about that. But there are a few changes and implementations I can't exactly get behind. For starters, you're limited to a single self-revive per game in solo. Sure, you can find additional revives in Dark Aether crystals or through loot dropped by zombies, but that's entirely up to chance, and you can only carry a single revive on your person at a time. This can make solo play oddly oppressive for newcomers, considering the lengths the rest of the game goes to welcome them. But once you reach player level 54, you can actually craft self-revives at the build station, and the revive system becomes completely busted in the opposite direction. From what I can tell, there is no limit to how many you can craft in a single game, be it solo or co-op. And since high-grade salvage is given out like candy in the higher rounds, as long as you can make it to the workbench, your game really can't end. I love that they went for a much more power-trippy style of gameplay for this year's zombies, but this is way too far in the other direction in my opinion. There needs to be some fear of failure in the gameplay. Even though I never felt like high rounds were an actual test of my skill, that possibility of failure is what made them kind of fulfilling at times. Knowing that I did indeed have limited chances and still made it far. And the only other issue I have is with the zombie damage increase. Well, more specifically, the lack of player communication. For those of us weirdos with a spreadsheet of all the zombie health and damage increases and what round that happens on, this isn't a problem. But I was playing with a friend who hadn't actually played much of the game, and he went down incredibly quickly on round 31. When he asked why, and I clarified that this is the round when zombies start dealing 75 damage a hit, he pointed out that there was absolutely no way for him to know that. And that got me thinking, there really is no way to tell unless you take a hit. That is a problem, and I'd like to propose a simple fix to this issue. I know you're probably really sick of the World War II comparisons, but hear me out. During the prologue to the final Reich, if you stayed inside the house for a bit, Marie would comment at the start of a round,
"They're getting stronger."
This clues the player in to the basic mechanic of increasing zombie health. For veterans like myself, this was a real, yeah, no shit moment. But when designing a game, you can't make it purely for people like me that play these games religiously. You need to communicate these basics to the player in case this is someone's first time picking it up, which is something Infinite Warfare and World War II absolutely excelled at. I think adding something very small like this into Cold War, where your operator makes a small comment on rounds 11, 31, and 46, would be a solid way to help communicate to players to keep their guard up, because the gameplay is about to change. But what about the people that play with voices and subtitles off, I hear you ask? Well, and I'll put this as lightly as possible, those people are hopeless barbarians. They are the same people who played the tortured path with Raven Team on launch day and then wondered, why isn't there any story dialogue? There are some people you just can't help. Hold up, before ending this segment, I need to talk about one more thing. The multiplayer-ification of zombies. Now, that probably sounds like a weird point to those of you listening to this review like a podcast, but for those actually watching, I think you know what I'm getting at. The game's heads-up display is abysmal. For context as to why I hate this so much, let's look to the past. In prior entries, zombies had unique heads-up displays and user interfaces that, on a good day, complemented the theme and style of the maps. Maps like Mob of the Dead and Buried started this trend back in Black Ops 2. But Infinite Warfare Zombies is easily the greatest example of this. Each map's HUD had such a unique, colorful energy to it. From Spaceland's sticker pack to Shaolin Shuffle's New York City newspaper, there was a charm to that UI that really complemented the experience. With this in mind, let's return to Cold War. There is literally zero charm or unique style to this whatsoever. Not only that, but the HUD is actually an active distraction while playing. I don't need 30 medals popping up on my screen whenever I kill a horde of zombies, and I especially don't need this awful zombie elimination taking up such a large part of my screen. This visual assault is a problem I have with modern gaming in general, where they feel the need to constantly shove shit in your face to trigger a slight dopamine release. But seeing it finally creep its way into a mode that is surprisingly shied away from that nonsense is a bit disheartening. So with the general gameplay covered, let's see if the game's sole launch map can match the incredibly high standards of the general gameplay. Without further delay, welcome to Die Maschine. Starting off with the positives, the first element I want to discuss is the map's accessibility. One of the most important things that makes a solid launch map in my opinion is its player accessibility. How hard is it for new players to get into? Treyarch's launch maps in specific have been pretty hit or miss in this aspect, with maps like Shadows of Evil, Blood of the Dead, and Dead of the Night feeling like they're actively trying to push new players away with how complex and oppressive their setups are. Okay, technically Dead of the Night wasn't a launch map, but Blundell said it was supposed to be until scheduling conflicts pushed it back. So I'm counting it. But thankfully, Die Maschine is much more reminiscent of the quote-unquote spin-off studio launch maps like Zombies in Spaceland and The Final Reich, where they actually give you a helping hand. When you spawn into Die Maschine, you're instantly given an objective marker that helps you navigate the map. Once you arrive in the facility and turn on the power, the game will proceed to guide you on how to unlock Pack-a-Punch. But after that, you're on your own. This is a fantastic addition for new players. The game provides just enough guidance to allow new players to get properly armed for a fun match, but then, should the player be so inclined, lets them go explore the rest of the map on their own. During this guided progression, you'll also be prompted into investigating an anomaly that teleports you to the titular Dark Aether. a distorted version of our own reality, where the rules of the world of man don't apply and odd, nightmarish creatures roam the lands.
That's you, Tomar, every day of your life.
Why? No! It's not.
That's Tomar's big arms.
Stop. This is not.
But this isn't just here to support the story and be really, really visually appealing. Because it's a distorted reality that reflects our own, you can retrieve certain objects that no longer appear in our world and use them to progress through the map. While most of these interactions are very basic in Die Maschine, I can't help but be intrigued by the possibilities here. Mirror realities that affect one another, that could be used to craft some really ingenious puzzles and Easter eggs. Hopefully, as the season progresses, and should this feature return, the gameplay potential of the Dark Aether is utilized to its fullest. As for the map itself, Die Maschine's map design facilitates almost every style of play. Whether you like to camp in a corner with your team, kite zombies around an open area, or simply run around like an absolute madman, this map has you covered. The way this map is constructed reminds me of Moon's design philosophy from all the way back in 2011.
The team really wanted to create with Moon the ultimate zombies playground.
This map has almost something from every map in the DLCs. You have caves, outdoor space, you have buildings or structures.
Die Maschine really is like Moon and Buried in this way. Tons of different areas, each with a unique gameplay flow to suit whatever style you like. Better yet, each of these unique areas link into one another, further helped by the Aether Tunnel fast travels that appear shortly after your first visit to the Dark Aether. So for those of us that like running from area to area, this one feels really, really good to play. As for the map's utilities, Die Maschine introduces 2 new perk machines, a redesigned Wonderfizz, and a brand new perk known as Elemental Pop. After purchase, any form of damage dealt by the player, which, funnily enough, includes things like direct impacts with C4, has a chance of triggering an alternate ammo type. This acts as a simple, passive buff to your entire arsenal, and I'm genuinely surprised it took Treyarch this long to implement such a simple, yet great idea. The Wonderfizz fares even better. Instead of randomly dispensing perk-a-colas like the old machine, because Cold War has no perk limit, you can choose any of the map's perks from a menu, and should you have the Dogecoin to spare, you can even purchase them all in one go. Funnily enough, there's actually a Season 1 challenge to do exactly that. What prevents this utility from being broken and ruining initial setup is if the Wonderfizz doesn't actually spawn in at the beginning of the match. Instead, access to the machine is only granted once you've traveled to the Dark Aether. This makes it so that you can't just buy 2 doors from spawn and camp by the machine at the start of the game. If you want it, you need to work a little bit for it. But once you've unlocked it, it'll eventually phase into the normal map from the Aether and remain there until the end of your game. So if you go down later on and have an influx of points, just drop by the Wonderfizz to instantly get back on your feet. With all this said, I really hope this machine becomes a staple of Cold War because it's just, everything about it is great. As for the enemies you'll fight, you'll be up against 4 new enemy types: the heavy zombies, plague hounds, megatons, and, during the main quest, Mayak the Megaton Overlord.
What the hell?
I smell bennies!
However, the only one I'll be discussing in this segment are the megatons and, I guess by extension, Mayak. Serving as the mini-boss of Die Maschine, megatons are these massive radioactive Russian zombies that have multiple forms of attack, a powerful melee swipe, and 2 separate projectile attacks, a blast and a bomb. The blast fires 3 shots at the player at a time, whereas their bombs actually linger on the field and chew right through the player's armor if they get too close. However, if you have the Die Machine, you can simply suck up the ball and remove the threat from the field instantly. Balance-wise, I think these enemies are very similar to Chaos's Blightfathers. They're nearly perfect. Now, people do complain that they're a bit too bullet spongy, but I don't know, I don't see the issue. Again, what's the issue? Okay, jokes aside, I truly don't feel that the megatons are too strong. While they can admittedly get quite powerful in the later rounds, so can the player. The megaton's health values appear to be balanced around the standard player's progression. The first megaton encounter will usually happen a round or 2 after unlocking Pack-a-Punch, so if you have a packed weapon, they're really not that hard to take care of. And the next spawn usually arrives by the time you've gathered enough resources to upgrade your weapon's rarity or pack level again, and so on. Honestly, the only problem I have with the megaton isn't even the enemy's fault. If you get too far away from a megaton, and this is particularly egregious around the tunnel area, because of how its spawn points are set up, sometimes the game will just respawn the Megaton right in front of you, and there's jack shit you can do about it.
This game is trash.
Moving on, let's touch briefly on the map's main quest. In a breath of fresh air, Die Maschine's quest isn't this complete nightmare that makes no sense. The quest is surprisingly simple and straightforward. All you really have to do is listen to a couple ghosts, craft the 4 die variants, carry a decon unit, bring Best Boy Orlov back to life, and then defend him as he overrides the particle accelerator. That's it. The steps are logical, easy to complete, I don't have to constantly have a YouTube guide open, and in a nice compromise between World War II's Notebook and Treyarch's complete lack of guidance, each step has a vague Aether hint to help you progress. For example, the Aether scope. When collecting the parts, a word hinting to the piece's location will appear next to its associated anomaly. Or later on, the word stolen will appear next to the Der Weschler's power supply, cluing the player into a scavenger hunt where they need to find and return the machine's decon unit to proceed. This allows for player exploration and natural discovery, unlike the Notebook, but gives us quest challenge folk like myself a slight nudge in the proper direction. And one last gameplay-ish related subject that I want to touch on real quick is the commander voiceover. In lieu of actual character dialogue, each match is instead commented over by Officer Weaver and a second randomly selected member of the Requiem faction. Among these include Major Carver, Dr. Strauss, and my personal favorite, Dr. Meredith Grey. While I don't necessarily think that replacing character quotes with these commanders was the right approach, each of these characters do provide a different flavor of commentary to your match. Carver is your standard military straight man with a dry sense of humor, whereas Strauss provides a slightly more scientific, informed approach to the battle since he used to work at the end station facility back in the 40s. Dr. Grey, on the other hand, has a much more informal, jokey demeanor about her, with a bit of that Cockney flair thrown in for good measure, which serves as a nice contrast to Weaver's more serious, by-the-books attitude.
Oh, of course. Leave it to the Nazis to create a weapon that literally spells out die. Do you think they even knew they were the baddies?
You know, if I've learned anything from video games, it's that short-haired English women... Yep. Before discussing the actual narrative of Die Maschine, I want to talk about the richness and mystery of its dark new world. Through collectible intel and the map's spectral reflections, much is revealed about this story's new world. We learn more about Requiem's purpose, the discoveries of Omega Group, and Samantha Maxis' own hunt to discover the truth. But the real highlight of the show is the Dark Aether itself. Through a transmitter constructed by a Dark Aether survivor known only as the Stranger, personal diaries and audio logs are transmitted to our reality that detail the hell these survivors have gone through. Through the limited glimpses that we get, we can glean that the Dark Aether is a place of fear, suffering, and pain where nothing makes sense. 21st century buildings stand alongside medieval structures, zombies, ancient creatures of legend, and mechanical monsters inhabit the land, placing the surviving humans at the bottom of the food chain. To quote Alice's audio log,
"It's the dustbin of history. It's the rubbish dump of time. When the universe is through with you, this is your final stop."
Although we, the audience, understand all of these things that Alice mentions, like the dragons from Gorod, the mechanical giants from Origins, etc., it's neat to see how the humans in the story react to them. Most are afraid like Alice and give up any hope of escape. But then there's the complete opposite. There's growing congregations of religious zealots that worship the giants and refer to them as elder gods. All of this adds up to an incredibly creepy, unsettling world that, unlike the Blundell era of Aether, leaves just enough to the imagination to have me constantly theorizing about it and begging for more. So, finally, let's talk story. This was the thing that worried me the most going in. I was certain that they'd instantly go back on the finality of Tag Der Toten, and we'd be back to business as usual with the premise cast. But, much to my surprise, I was 100% wrong. So let's catch up on the story. After the events of Tag Der Toten, which saw Primus Nikolai sacrificing himself and his comrades to collapse the multiverse and banish it all to the place below creation, the universe was allowed to start anew, free from the influences that had corrupted the multiverse since the beginning of time. However, in this new singular reality, during the final hours of World War II, the Nazis began experimenting with forces they could never hope to understand in a desperate final bid to turn the tides of the war. I feel like I've said this exact setup before. Their work at the end station facility eventually led them to breaching the dark Aether, causing the scientists working at the facility to turn into zombies. Shortly after, the bunker was discovered by the Soviets and subsequently sealed away from history. This brings us into the events of Die Maschine, which serves as a soft reboot for the zombies' Aether story. Taking place in 1983, rogue BND agent Samantha Maxis delivers a tape to long-forgotten Black Ops character Grigory Weaver, which shows that a rogue sect of Soviets known as Omega Group has rediscovered the sealed bunker and reactivated the particle accelerator, causing the anomaly housed within the site to reopen and leak into several key outbreak zones across the world. Now, with a ticking clock, Requiem sends a covert strike force to the end station facility in a desperate attempt to stop Omega Group's plans. So, we've got a solid setup with some recognizable characters, a clear villain, and a looming threat with a little bit of mystery in the back. That's great, but the part that made me really happy is that Primus and Ultimus are still dead. Now, I'm not just noting this as a positive to be a hipster asshole. I swear, let me explain. One of the stronger themes of Black Ops 4 Zombies, and I guess in retrospect Black Ops 3, was letting go of what you love today to finally move on and create a better tomorrow. This was really hammered home in Tag Der Toten, where Nikolai kinda condescendingly tells the audience,
"The Great War? No. The greatest war is the one we fight against ourselves."
This is why Revelations is often considered the bad ending, and Tag Der Toten is the good ending. In Revelations, Richtofen was unable to let go of his own fears and the ones he grew to care for so much over the course of Black Ops 3. So, with the combination of Monty and the Shadow Man's own fears of fading away, the corruption of the Aether was allowed to persist, until a divergence in the timeline allowed Nikolai to make the hard choice to let go. This theme was capped off incredibly with the final shot of Tag Der Toten, where the player was given limited control of Samantha and Eddie. You could do nothing but make them walk forward. Along with the characters in the story, you, the player, are literally forced to push this old story and its characters away into a brighter future. Maybe it's because I take the Aether story a bit more seriously than most and try my damnedest to find a deeper meaning in all media I consume, but I feel that all the power of Tag Der Toten's ending would be completely null and void if they were to bring these characters back. Except for Eddie, they have a narrative out for that. That one's okay. We've all written our own little fan fictions about how these characters would come back, and don't you even try to deny it. I did it too. Like, here, I've had this idea ever since the map's reveal. After the events of Tag Der Toten, Samantha is the only one that remembers what happened in the original story. So when she grows up, she uses her connections as a government agent to track down the reset version of those men that helped her and Eddie in another lifetime. Richtofen, Dempsey, Takeo, and Nikolai. But she doesn't do anything silly like recruit them into an Avengers-esque task force. Instead, she merely observes how their new lives are going, and as an audience member, this is where we learn that they're all living their ideal lives they wish for before their deaths. Nikolai lives in Russia with his beloved. Dempsey is now a drill instructor in the United States military. Richtofen teaches medicine, and Takeo spends his days at peace, listening to the joy of his children at play. Upon confirming that these heroes are indeed alive and living their ideal lives, ones where they no longer have to fight, because she's grown up and now fully understands the constant pain these heroes went through for her, she walks away, leaving them to live that better tomorrow that they all fought so hard for. Now, even though that sounds nice and heartwarming in theory, part of me would still hate to see this. Tag Der Toten stated that as long as the Primus crew live, the corruption of the Aether will persist. They could, in theory, write around this by saying that since Primus didn't live in any dimension for a short time, that was enough to plunge the multiverse to the dark Aether. But honestly, I would really prefer they don't, because they've done this before. Like 3 times. For reference, Origins was supposed to be the end, but then Black Ops 3 continued the story, nullifying any impact that ending may have had. But most of us were okay with it because Origins' ending was terrible. Then we got to Revelations. This map was built up as the ending of the Origins characters, one final battle for tomorrow between the forces of good and evil. And the outro cutscene flat out had a closing card that said, "The End." But then, the story was continued in Black Ops 4 via divergences in the timeline and nullified the very existence of Gorod Krovi and Revelations. Then we finally got to Tag Der Toten, which, unlike the other endings, didn't leave any room for continuation because of the new rules they established in that map. It confidently and definitively closed the book on this arc of the story by delivering a bittersweet, hopeful ending, with one last beautiful send-off for the Primus and Ultimus characters that we've grown to love so much over the last decade. What I'm trying to get at with this long-winded, probably scattershot tangent is that not every story and group of characters needs a happy ending. Every story needs consequences. Craig Houston knew this when writing Tag, and I think that so far, his work on Cold War Zombies has done a pretty great job at respecting that idea. With a long list of good covered, let's dive into the issues I have with Die Maschine. Starting with gameplay elements, we have armored zombies. I'm not even gonna pretend to not hate them. The idea behind them is fine. Break down their armor to expose their weak points like a Stoker or a Destroyer. In theory, I have no problem with that. But while playing, I always find them to be huge annoyances because unlike the armored enemies of Black Ops 4, their armor doesn't have preset health. Instead, it behaves almost exactly like the player's armor. The way their armor works is that it halves all incoming bullet damage by roughly 55% and has no multipliers associated with it. For explosive weapons like the RPG and the ray gun, this isn't too bad. But what about weapons like the Magnum and the snipers, where their damage output is based mostly around hitting an area with high damage multipliers? Yep. For as iffy as the jumping code is on the Plague Hounds, heavy zombies are the main enemy I would be ecstatic to never have to fight again, because they just make way too many of the weapons useless. Now, if they were retooled to be more like the Stokers or the Destroyers, then I'd be totally fine with them. But as they are now, they are a blight on Die Maschine. Speaking of Plague Hounds, let's talk about them real quick. They're literally just Hellhound reskins, but with two notable differences. After death, they explode and leave a toxic gas cloud that lingers for a few seconds. And secondly, they can leap at the player like the Tigers from 9. Thankfully, the attack doesn't deal 100 damage this time. No idea what they were thinking when they made those things. These seemingly small additions make what has always been a laughably weak fodder enemy into something that can actually be somewhat threatening, if not dealt with quickly. I love all of these ideas on paper, and originally had this enemy in the good segment, but their actual implementation just isn't good enough. While Treyarch has fixed many issues with this enemy since launch, the way their jumps work is still really flawed. In an ideal reality, Plague Hounds would pounce at the player and the rotation will be locked to 0. In this harsh, merciless one, they can actually adjust their trajectory mid-flight to curve towards the player, leading to some absolutely bogus hits. Now, to be fair, it's possible that this issue may be addressed in future updates, but seeing as the Tigers had this exact same issue and were never fixed, I wouldn't count on it. I like to be an optimist, but I just don't see it happening. However, if Treyarch does end up adjusting this part of them, then A, well, I look like a damn fool, and B, I think that these will be a genuinely great enemy type and a solid evolution of the Hellhounds. Another category where the map falters is in its wonder weapons. We have what appears to be the zombie standard at this point, of a base weapon that can be upgraded into 4 different variants: the Electrobolt, Cryo Emitter, Nova 5, and Thermophasic. I really dug these weapons on release, but after playing with them for a while, I can honestly say that this is a pretty mixed batch. From a design perspective, they're really cool, but their actual effectiveness tapers off as early as round 30, sometimes even sooner depending on the variant. What's even worse is how little balancing there is among them. For example, you have the Cryo Emitter, which can hit 1 zombie at a time and deals 2,000 damage per tick. But then there's the Electrobolt, which is literally the exact same thing as the Cryo Emitter, but it has twice the amount of ammo and can deal 7,500 damage per tick under prolonged fire. So why would you ever use the Cryo Emitter? The Nova 5 fares even worse. When fired, it creates a toxic cloud that damages any enemy that walks through it. Honestly, a great idea for a weapon, but when you actually use it, you die a little on the inside. The gas cloud only deals 1,500 damage per tick. And because it doesn't slow down zombies like the Plague Hound gas, in the high rounds, they can super sprint right through the gas quick enough to render even the most well-placed shots completely worthless. Now, I have to admit there is exactly one use for the Nova 5. I'm sure many of you know of the Speed Cola camping strategy. You keep the entrance closed, sit on top of this machine, and lay into the zombies as they try to climb up. Because of how long their climbing animation is, you can actually get some use out of the Nova 5's gas, especially if you have Ring of Fire active and multiple players. Is this fun? No. Is this even the most effective weapon to camp with? Also no, but it works. A little. Look, I understand how hard unlimited ammo weapons are to balance, as we've seen with the Thrustodyne and Wonderbus, but the die machines are in desperate need of a balancing pass. Something else I want to note is that most of the variants lack the punch of many previous Wonder weapons. To showcase what I'm talking about, here's some of Treyarch's more impactful Wonder weapons. The animation work and sound design behind these weapons gives them some real oomph factor. Not only are they incredibly powerful, but they feel powerful too, and it really plays into the power fantasy aspect of zombies. Now, let's take a look at the die machine. The animation and effects work is solid, but the sound design is incredibly lackluster, especially on the suction, so I never feel like I'm firing something all that strong. Moving on, the last gameplay issue I want to discuss revolves around the map's content, or rather, lack thereof. Aside from the Wonder Weapons and main quest, there really isn't that much to this one. It's just a big empty sandbox. A super well designed sandbox, but a lacking one nonetheless. This doesn't really bother me personally, because I play zombies primarily to run around and kill zombies with cool Wonder Weapons. But I figured I should bring it up regardless, because I know that this is a deal breaker for some, since we've been pretty spoiled by content-rich maps like Shadows of Evil, Der Eisendrache, Blood of the Dead, etc. Moving on from gameplay, let's talk story and characters. I discussed earlier how much I like the world building and the sense of mystery presented in this map, but the actual narrative and overall story is disappointingly bare bones at the moment. It's very much akin to Extinction's first map, Point of Contact. While the DLC cycle did bring a very deep mythology and large-scale narrative to the table, in Point of Contact, the only thing we had to chew on was, there's some weird aliens in Colorado, go set off a nuke and head back to base. That's literally it. The same can be said for Die Maschine. There's just not much here other than what feels like a prologue to something bigger. Now, once the season is over, we'll probably look back on this map just like Point of Contact and say, as a prologue, it did its job. But for now, for those of you who play purely for the narrative, this map ends up being quite the disappointment. And lastly, a lack of unique playable characters. When I initially heard that the playable characters would be your multiplayer operators, I was honestly kind of intrigued because I think the idea of crossing characters over from different parts of the Black Ops universe is one brimming with potential. But the problem arises in the fact that Die Maschine takes this awesome idea and does literally nothing with it. The writers could have fleshed these characters out and given them tons of quest-exclusive dialogue between one another akin to previous Zombies entries, but in-game, all we really have are generic quotes about killing zombies and reviving each other. None of them react to the quest steps or really anything happening around them, which is so disappointing. What I really grew to love about Zombies quests, even though most of them were pretty poorly designed, was that you really felt like you were going on a journey with a group of comrades. For all the grief I give the game, and will continue to, Black Ops 4 was especially good at this. Whether you were attempting to free the souls of Alcatraz or complete the trials of the Nine, there was plenty of scripted interaction between our heroes. Cold War, on the other hand, lacks this quality, leading to the mode losing a bit of its charm and personality. And that's about it. I know this segment was pretty short, especially compared to the positives, but believe me, I tried. I sat for hours thinking of things to bitch about to make a more balanced review. But in truth, I found that there really isn't much about Die Maschine that I actively dislike. So, in conclusion, Die Maschine and Cold War Zombies in general has surprised the hell out of me so far. While it has some issues and lacks the personality of Treyarch's bests, I just find myself having such a fun time that I can't say I'm all that bothered by its faults. The changes made to player progression feels like a complete 180 from Black Ops 4, and the launch map is incredibly accessible, providing new players with a relatively simple playground to get acquainted with. The only real negatives I can list are the lack of playable characters, the wonder weapons are a bit of a mixed bag, and there isn't enough gameplay content within the map itself. That last issue likely has something to do with the alleged troubled development of this game, but whether this was indeed a Sledgehammer project that was Frankensteined into an Aether reboot or whatever happened, I don't care. All I care about is the end product, and whoever really is responsible for it, be it Sledgehammer, Treyarch, Raven, some combination of all three, whoever, you all did a great job and ended up making something that I feel is really special. I'm super curious to see what you all have in store for us as the DLC season progresses. Well, that's all for today. I know this took a lot longer than usual to have out, but I simply wasn't feeling it for the longest time. And I'm very much a it's done when it's done kind of guy. If you try to force a project out, it's gonna end up terrible, or at least not as good as it could have been. I know that I can do better than that, and you as a viewer deserve better. So anyway, thank you all for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time when we cover the game's first DLC map, Firebase Z.